All right, we are finishing up the last parts of our study of example. We talked about these last two truths. We know that Sunday was a special day. The church history reveals that it was observed every Sunday, that bore witness to the truth of the New Testament. So when you look at really the area of example, there's sufficient truths that establish what the biblical practice should be. But let's just talk about the idea of example from more of a general principle. This is a quote from James Baird. In the light of the role of apostolic authority, applying the same criteria of Bible study to what we do to commands, we conclude that certain events mirror or reflect a command. The event points backward to an apostolic direction, as the command points forward to the obedience of that command. It is obvious that the Bible records events. We hold that in the Holy Spirit's wisdom, every event was recorded for a reason. What is so unusual about concluding that by applying the same criteria that we do to commands, that we deduce direction or obligation from some of these events? Now, a number of points are being made here, but this is the primary point of consideration. And that is, we're not going wild and crazy with this particular category of example. And as I asked you yesterday, what is the big deal about, as far as doctrine is concerned, that typically falls in the category of example? And several of you had already had enough experience with this to know that really it's one thing, and that is the Lord's Supper. But we talked about the principles of example, and we used the Lord's Supper as a case in point. But now we want to make this point very clear. And that's where we have fallen down in the past of explaining the hermeneutic, explaining why some examples are binding and some examples are not binding. And that is, the only examples that are binding examples are those that have a command behind the example. There's some biblical principle that has been established somewhere, and then we see the outgrowth of, or the implementation of, that particular command. So what we know is the Lord's Supper was commanded. And even as it was pointed out yesterday in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul says that we're doing this, declaring the Lord's death until He comes. All right, there was an expectation that this was going to be done, and it was going to be done until Jesus comes back. All right, so there's the command. But there is no, in command language, how the Lord's Supper is to be implemented. What we have is the example of how it's being done. And that brings us back around to Baird's comment and what we've been saying. First of all, does God hold men responsible for examples? Yes, He does. Did Jesus and the apostles expect people to follow their lead and how they guided them, navigated through the waters of early Christianity? Yes, they most certainly did. As a matter of fact, we said, and this is our thesis statement, that if God holds men responsible for examples, then examples has to be a part of the hermeneutic. Well, did He hold the Gentiles responsible for the example of creation? Yeah, Did they receive a written document? Did they receive some law thing that floated down that was filled with all sorts of imperatives? No, all they got was a tree and a rock, and they were expected to get from that what God wanted them to do. And then secondly, when Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 says that if anybody's not going to follow our example, keep aloof from that person. All right, there was consequence. And that was all that we were trying to establish. That if the Bible demonstrates that there are consequences for not following an example, not a command, we already talked about that. Consequences to not following an example, then example needs to, at some way, some level, be included into our hermeneutic. All right, here's a quote from Wayne Jackson, The Power of Example. How do we conclude that the example of observing the communion on Sunday, Acts 27, is a binding precept? The answer, the overall context of the New Testament. That is, biblical information on the same subject elsewhere. This establishes a spiritual connection between the Lord's Supper and the first day of the week. The components of the communion, bread and fruit of the vine, are reflective of the Savior's death, according to Matthew 26. And the first day of the week commemorates his resurrection. Obviously, therefore, Sunday becomes a binding example for the time of the Lord's Supper. Why? Okay, say, okay, Wayne, I didn't get what you're saying. Because of the spiritual connection. The spiritual connection is what makes this particular practice on this particular day with these particular elements that which needs to be imitated. Otherwise, you're losing everything. If you have Thursday night communion with hamburgers and french fries, what is the spiritual connection with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus? There is none. So you've lost that. Therefore, the purpose and the meaning of that act of worship is completely gone. So, why are approved examples binding? All right. You say, well, redefine once again an approved example. An approved example is that which has a command behind the example. I think that's pretty simple. I don't know of any examples that we are binding that have no command behind them, no spiritual connection behind them. Anybody think of one? I'm not aware of any. So it's not like this is really this huge arena of topics of which, you know, the churches of Christ are just being unbelievably hard-nosed on it has to be this way and this way and this way and this way because of some biblical example. I don't even know what they'd be talking about.
Denny?
Yeah.
I know that there's principle behind following the elders, and when they ask us to do something, there's authority behind it as far as the scriptures go. But what about Wednesday nights? Because a lot of people do bind that. What do you think about that?
That's a good question. And you're to obey them that have the rule over you. So God has authorized the elders to, shepherd the sheep, lead the flock, make decisions that are going to be that which is spiritually beneficial. So from that perspective, when the elders make decisions, they're operating within the guidelines of the authority that's been given to them. And so I think Wednesday night would be a case in point. On the flip side of that, you've got people that say that elders cannot legislate or implement anything that doesn't have biblical authority. Wednesday night is a non-issue. There is no biblical authority for having a midweek anything. And so to make that binding thing is something that would fall under the category of lording it over the flock. And I kind of get that too. As a result of this, I know some elderships are not making Wednesday night attendance a matter of fellowship. It's something that the elders think is good and advisable, and so they make it available. But for those that are choosing not to come, it's not going to be something that they're going to withdraw fellowship from them over that. But it may be an indication from the elders to take a deeper look into the lives of those people, and maybe it's an indication of a spiritual problem. So that's kind of the way the Bear Valley elders have approached that, as a matter of fact. There have been some in the past that have wanted to disfellowship people for not faithfully attending midweek service or maybe Sunday nights. And then I think they sort of reassessed that and said, well, we're not sure that this is a disfellowshipable offense. So what are your thoughts on that? You've got...
Well, basically what you're saying, just you can evaluate people, but you can't condemn them.
Just a question. Hebrews 10:25, the assembling together. What would that include?
Well, one of the things that is frequently misapplied is a failure to recognize that the assembly is accusative singular in Hebrews 10:25. And so you are not supposed to forsake the assembly. And so he's only got Sunday in mind.
Thank you.
The assembling, the translation, the assembling, or I believe there's even some translations that make it plural, the assemblings, that opens up a whole different can of worms. And that's not accurate to what the Greek is saying there. Just one assembly in mind. Other comments? All right, second, because they, that is example, are a part of the divine revelation and therefore provide divine guidance. Just like a father shows his son how to do something, he does that with the expectation that the son is going to imitate the example.
Denny,
Yes.
going back to that question, I guess, backing up. So have you known congregations to disfellowship over attendance?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just where I'm from, but I mean that's almost foreign, and maybe that's wrong that it's foreign now. But
And it's not Sunday morning. It's Sunday nights or Wednesday nights. They're disfellowshipping over those.
So that would be wrong then to do that if it's talking about the assembly.
Yeah, I think so. Now, if they're not attending Sunday morning, then we got a problem because that's clear disobedience to Hebrews 10:25. because that is the assembly that we're commanded to be a part of.
But if we're obeying the rulers, those who have ruled over us, and they are making it a thing of fellowship, then would it be wrong? I mean, if they're saying, I'm over you, I'm an elder, you need to come.
That's
the question.
That's the question. Yeah, because on the one hand, I'm of the mindset that the elders have the right to do that. And then, there are others that are saying, but that's an example of lording it over the flock, because now they're implementing things that are without biblical authority. I said, well, that's not totally true. Granted, the New Testament doesn't know of midweek Bible study, but the New Testament does know of does discuss the fact that elders are over our souls. They're looking out for us, and so, a shepherd doesn't just care for sheep once a week. I mean, a shepherd is trying to implement an environment that's going to provide protection and growth and nurturing 7 days a week. And so if an elder tries to be a shepherd, then, I think that's within his scope of authority to do that.
Thanks.
The eldership where I'm at has had a lot of discussion on this recently. And matter of fact, we had one elder leave the congregation over it. They weren't pinpointing which assembly like we're talking about here, but the question really got into one of the elders that left basically just said we can't withdraw fellowship for forsaking the assembly, period. And he had trouble with what does it mean to walk disorderly. His idea of walking disorderly is just causing division in the congregation. Now, he put it a narrow definition of that. Just maybe a comment on that, if you would, just for my...
About walking disorderly?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, because when, basically you look at the greater context with the idea of walking as a lifestyle. And so a disorderly lifestyle is not in order with God's directive. So it could include what you do on Tuesday nights as well as, Sunday morning or any other time. So I think it's a pretty wide brushstroke if you're talking about what walking disorderly is. And so if you're going to disfellowship someone over living their lives in a undisciplined, unspiritual way, I would agree that you could do that.
My point to them was we need to stop being so, which sin do we withdraw fellowship from, and more of the when do you do it, when they won't repent of whatever the situation is. That was the approach I took talking with them about it.
Yeah, and I think you would answer the way I would have answered, because when you go through the 4-step process of Matthew 18, every time you're getting resistance. You've done all that you know to do to try to win a person back to repenting. And that really is the key to 1 John 5:16. When he talks about stop praying for somebody. Well, where do you get to the point? Well, the problem is, and this is, once again, that we're not training ourselves to think exegetically. We want to jump to 1 John 5:16 and interpret, well, you shouldn't pray for such a person. We run wild as to the interpretation, but John has been walking through that particular idea all the way back in chapter 1. If someone says, I don't sin, he's a liar and the truth is not in him. And then if someone is practicing sin, 1 John 3:8 and 9, that's who we're talking about, someone that doesn't see sin, is living in sin, is not willing to confess their sin. Again, that's back in chapter 8. If we confess our sin, he's faithful and just to forgive us. Well, so if I'm dealing with someone and they're still showing a heart that is sensitive to the gospel and the will of God, man, I'm praying for them fervently. But if they're saying, look, I don't have a problem and I'm not going to change, then you can pray all that you want, but it's not going to do any good. I have a sermon, and what isn't unique with me, I'm sure I stole it from somebody else, but entitled, When It's a Sin to Pray, and it's based on the book of Jeremiah. 3 times God commands Jeremiah to stop praying. And I know it's 14:11 and 11:14, and then the other one I can't ever remember because it needs to be a combination of 11 and 14 apparently for me to remember it. But it'd be a sin for him to pray because God told him not to, and the people aren't going to repent. And that really lines up with John 5. Another comment? Yeah.
I know when we discuss like Matthew 16, the way that it's translated when Jesus is talking to Peter and then the rest of the apostles in 18, where he says, what you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. And we say that that's translated, it shall have been, because they didn't have the authority on their own just to make up things and bind them on other people. Do you think the apostles could have done that? And would Wednesday evening service be an example of the elders, making a law that people have to follow? I guess in my mind, if there were an elder in the first century who said, we want everyone here to be circumcised, would that then make circumcision like a fellowship issue or a Wednesday night? I guess I'm just trying to figure out how, because in my mind, Hebrews 13, where it talks about those leaders or those who rule over you, obeying them, it also says that they're the ones who teach the Word of God to you a couple verses earlier. And so I've generally interpreted that as being when they're teaching you the Word of God, obey what they say.
Yeah.
Rather than when they're giving helpful advice, it's a sin to not follow it or...
Yeah, and that's why you say, we're teaching the Word of God. The Word of God commands growth. The Word of God has an expectation that we are going to, have fellowship with one another. And in Hebrews 3:13, encourage one another day after day. All right, so we're trying to provide a framework by which these things can take place. And Wednesday night is an attempt to do that. So they're teaching the Word of God to us, and they're providing a biblical framework for midweek Bible study. So, I can still say, all right, that's within their right to do that. Even though you don't have a book, chapter, and verse that's going to say you need to meet on Wednesday nights, because then it's not something that an elder can decide to do or not to do. It's a command of God.
So basically, it comes down to the heart of the elders and their approach to the sheep, because they can encourage you, like you were saying, day after day, as long as it's still called today, and you're encouraging one another as you see the day drawing near, to keep assembling with one another. But do you think that them saying you have to do this is along the same lines as the encouragement to do it?
Yeah. And then this is something where it sounds like, we're really walking a fine line between lording it over the flock and just trying to be good spiritual leaders. And unfortunately, elders have been frequently charged with trying to be lords, when they're not trying to be that at all. They're just trying to be good spiritual mentors and provide a spiritual framework for growth.
Not just trying to be good spiritual men. I think they're obeying a commandment that God has given them. I think in 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter commanded the elders to feed the flock. He's not talking about chicken and Kool-Aid. He's talking about the Word of God. And so again, Wednesday night is an expedient. It's a means or a vehicle for them to obey the commandment that God has given them. So to me, I don't know, I hear a lot of discussion. To me, in my mind, it's a lot easier than what we're making it. God told them to feed the flock. They say, hey, Wednesday night is an opportunity for us to obey that commandment. To me, it's simple.
Yeah, and I think that I would say it like this, that, all right, so, Joe Smith has a job, that requires him to work on Wednesday nights, and so he's not being rebellious or defiant, but he just can't be there. His job is such. So the elders have said, we'd like everybody to be there, but they know that Joe Smith would be there were it not for. So you're going to disfellowship him because of that? Well, probably not. But if you've got somebody that just is almost rebellious and defiant, and they're saying, I don't have to, I don't want to, and you can't micromanage my life. Really, we're talking about a whole different sin problem outside of the Wednesday night thing. And I think the elderships that I've known that have wanted to disfellowship over Sunday night and Wednesday night attendance were really taking more of that approach than they were anything else.
Just trying to wrap my mind around all of this, and we're talking about example. Okay, am I wrong in thinking this way? We have a command to assemble, and we have an example of they met daily. That's a little bit of a stretch there. Okay, we're not going to meet daily, but stick a Wednesday night and a Sunday night in there to expedient, I guess. Am I abusing kind of this idea of an example?
Yeah, you are at some level because they did not meet daily. Acts 20 shows us that they didn't meet daily. Now, and it has always bothered me what people have done with Acts 2, because they've used Acts 2 to prove that the early Christians met every day. But what they don't understand, these are Jews that have traveled hundreds of miles to be there for the Feast of Pentecost, which was, a week-long feast plus one. And so they're going to be there, and if you became a Christian on Sunday and you're going to be there for 7 more days, what are you going to do? You're going to meet every day. But once they returned to Rome and all the other places that they came from, did they meet daily? No. No, they met once a week. And that's all that they met. You don't have any biblical passage outside of Acts 2 to indicate that they met daily.
Command, example, inference. That's what we've been talking about in a biblical context. But outside of that, for a moment, if you were going to exercise authority over someone, is there any other way that you would do that? Other than, if you were going to command someone or instruct them with authority, outside of a biblical context, is there any way you would do that other than a direct command, inferring what you wanted them to do, or giving them an example?
Not that I know of. It's going to have to fall in one of those three. Which, what you've just done is hit on the reasoning that John Locke went through. As a lawyer, he's saying, on what basis might we charge somebody with violating law? And, they talk about the spirit of the law. Command, example, and inference was, and then all of a sudden you've got the Campbell's going, man, that's the biblical way that we learn God's law.
Well, it's almost like that's part of who we are. It's like that's natural for us to think and reason that way.
Yeah. It really is. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, with the Finney method, would you say that is just like, we have laws of logic and we have mathematics and things. You don't have to go to the Bible to prove 2 + 2 = 4, but you know it just because that's the way that it is. And would you say that that's kind of how this method of hermeneutics is? That's just how you understand a document. That's the way it is.
Yeah, because what we're saying is this is the way that we've operated in life for, since the beginning of time. And we haven't had a problem with that. But now that we've got some things in God's Word that we no longer want to adhere to, we want to throw out that hermeneutic.
I'm reading this book called Willful Blindness, which I highly recommend. It's not anything to do with Christianity, but she tells about the Nortel trial, and the judge instructed the jury there that in regards to this concept of willful blindness, that if you find that someone's claiming, I didn't know anything about this, but they had every reasonable and logical way to know it, you can charge them just as if they were presented fully with the knowledge. And so we accept, even in our legal world, the understanding that there are some things you should have known. And you can be guilty of not knowing those things if you willfully didn't know. And I think when we look at, this stuff that we're looking at, and those who don't want to accept it are putting that into practice. They're saying, we don't want to know this because of the demands it places on us in regards to, the specifics that we've been talking about and other things. And so they're just going to pretend like it's not real.
Yeah, and, to use my standing before God on the day of judgment illustration, so you say, did you not see in my word that they took the Lord's Supper only on Sundays, once every week? Well, yeah, I saw that. Why wasn't that good enough to provide a framework for what you were supposed to do? Well, you didn't command it. Yeah, but I showed it to you. Did I show you any other way that they did it? No. You only showed me that way. Okay? Why wasn't that good enough? And you could just see, God saying, does everything, are you so immature that everything has to be, you have to be led by the hand, and everything has to be in, thou shalt not terminology? Well, that's what we're studying with the hermeneutics. God will teach us stuff with a question. He'll teach us stuff with a hortatory subjunctive. He's constantly, in all sorts of different ways, communicating his will. And so, for us to say, okay, God, it's got to only be this way, is so unbelievably immature. And the fact of the matter is, and this is really what we're talking about in this class, it's not biblical. We're showing that God doesn't work that way. We're seeing Paul say, a guy's out of here if he's not going to follow our example. That sounds pretty binding to me. All right. A third reason approved examples are binding is because the inspired and authorized apostles commanded Christians to follow their example. Okay, some other considerations. The early church, who was closest to the time of the apostles, did not feel they could take liberties with the first century pattern. They duplicated and imitated the Sunday-only time for the Lord's Supper. So they were not feeling they could take liberties with this. History has demonstrated that those who lead the pattern soon apostatize. The disciples of Christ are a perfect case in point. It dawned on me when I was going through this that I don't know why I still use the disciples of Christ as an example of apostasy after you leave the pattern. Because we've got, since 1989, we got 23 years of examples of our own churches that have apostatized. And they no longer have the candlestick, because they're certainly not anything close to the church of the New Testament.
are those who bind more than the Bible says to bind considered to be apostatizers?
Yeah, for the same reason. God isn't wanting to make Christianity, such a heavy burden. Jesus said, "My yoke is easy, and my load is light." That's the way it needs to be kept. And if people are going to start being pharisaical and adding rules and regulations that are not biblical, then that's going to make the gospel of Christ heavy and every bit as cumbersome and burdensome as what Judaism was as a result of the Pharisees. So we really have to be careful. And, and I'll be the first to admit that maybe my tendency and my makeup is to err on that side. And so I need to be careful. Maybe you're the same way. I know that we criticize the Pharisees, and I know the New Testament is critical of the Pharisees, but I at least get where they were coming from with their traditions as a fence about the law. They wanted so badly for people to obey the law that they made these other rules in order to ensure compliance to the law. So on one hand you say, well, their hearts were in the right place. They wanted ultimately the right thing. But when those fences became laws, then you've got a problem. Plucking grain on the Sabbath. God never said that, but they did. But that was something they thought, look, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, and so now let's define what work is. And so then they defined what work is, and somebody plucking grain on the Sabbath was defined as work. That was ultimately something that was a kind of an example, a case in point of something that you shouldn't do. Well, then later on, it's equal to Bible authority. You pluck grain on the Sabbath, you have sinned. You have violated law. Look at Matthew 12. That's what they're accusing the disciples of. Or, eating your food with unwashed hands. Well, that wasn't something that the law said, but in order to make sure that everything that we do, including the eating of the food, we're doing in a pure way, make sure that you wash your hands before you eat. Well, that was probably a good idea, a good suggestion. But it morphed into law, so in Matthew 15, now they're accusing the disciples of violating that sacred tradition, that law. Well, we've got to be careful not to do the same thing.
It's really not hard to get from picking up sticks to picking grain.
Yeah.
You can see where it went from. And that's what the law said. And then someone says, well, look, we were only told not to pick up sticks. We can do anything else we want on the Sabbath. You can see the struggle and kind of where it came from. And in a sense, we're a little in the same place now, maybe on a different side. I remember someone asked me one time, he said, he said to me, what really bothers me about the Church of Christ? And I said, well, no, what's that? And he says, you got to be right about everything. And, I thought about it for a long time, and it's kind of an indictment, but it shows our concern about what God wants us to do. You're right. We need to be very careful. Both ways, because we can step off the narrow path so easily on the side of, I don't really think that really applies to today. Or do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's a little frightening because it's a little more than frightening sometimes. It's just an awesome burden.
Yeah, because on the one hand, we're looking at the Bible through a perspective that if it's in the Bible, that it's God communicating to us what He wants done. And so we're paying attention to the minutiae. We're wanting to make sure that even in the little things, we're compliant with our God. We're doing what He wants us to do, because that's how we think love is expressed. On the other hand, though, you've got those on the outside that are seeing that, and they're saying, that got to be right on everything, and that seems, so confining and almost robotic, making Christians that we're sort of mindless, and so I can at least see where the perspective comes from, but at least those that I've dealt with that have that kind of perspective don't really understand the logic behind it. Because we live in a world today that's just free and easy. Do what you want to do, love God, and whatever that means to you.
I guess my question is, how could the Pharisees have done it differently? We've talked about the definition of sing, and I think we're right about that. But when you talk about the Pharisees defined work, if they didn't define work, how are they going to know what it was? And we've defined sing, and if ado means sounds with the mouth, and yet people, and I'll be honest, I'm one of them, have a real problem with, there's the singing groups now that make all the noises of all these drums and various things. They're making it with their mouth. So am I wrong to say, I'm not sure if that's singing, or, you know what I mean? And that doesn't have to be the only example we think of. Maybe you could think of another one that explains it better. But
no, I think that's a good example, because that's, that is real life. That's kind of where we are today in addressing these kind of issues. And we talk about the words that are used, and for me to go and I'm making drum sounds, or I'm making bass sounds with my voice, is that really singing? It's with the mouth, so you got the do part covered. But as far as the singing part of both the do and the solo, does that really catch it? And my point hasn't been so much in looking at ado and looking at solo, but looking at the first of the four, and that is speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Because we are admonishing one another, and we are teaching one another. And therefore, if what's coming out of my mouth does not do either one of those two things, then it's not going to be acceptable according to the text. So when we want to produce a biblical argument against something, and I do the same thing with clapping. All right, if you're clapping during the song, and that song is a song of worship, then the fundamental question always is, what is it that God has asked for? Now, if the sin of Nadab and Abihu wasn't that they got the fire from the wrong place, but that they inserted with the fire something that God did not ask for, then that was a violation of respecting the holiness of God. So if God asks for singing, and He's not asking for anything, any other sounds besides that, then are we going into uncharted waters or unauthorized waters when we're introducing some other things? And is that pharisaical? Is that legalistic? Well, go ahead and label it that if you must, but saying, but I do know that I've got authority to do this. I do know this is okay with God. And say, all right, you think clapping is okay, during songs of worship? Where would you go to say that it's okay? Well, there's no place to go. There's literally not a single place you can go other than well, I just think it's okay. Well, that's what brings us into these dangerous areas where you don't really need Bible authority. You're not staying within the confines of what the text will allow, and introducing these things that, I don't know. Yeah.
I think that goes along well, and you mentioned the verse a day or two ago in Matthew 23 and verse 23, where it says, these things you should have done without neglecting the others. And then he says, you strain out the gnat but swallow the camel. That's not an indictment on straining out the gnat. The thing they did wrong was swallowing the camel.
Right.
I mean, if straining out the gnat, I mean, you look in your drink, you take it out, you try to do what's right. I mean, it's a small thing, but you still try to do what God wants you to. And that's kind of how I guess I see some of these things. It's not, if we focus so much on, they clap their hands and so we won't let them in here, but we're never willing to help people who are in need, and we're focused more on that than anything else, then that's a major problem. But that's not an indictment against trying to worship properly. That's an indictment on being cold-hearted and unloving.
Yeah, that's a good point. Here's a number of slides, and is the thumb drive making its way around?
No.
You have all these quotes, but there are so many references from the early church that prove the point that I was making. Like Tertullian, 175 A.D., we hold communion with the apostolic churches because our doctrine is in no respect different from theirs, from the apostles. All right, so here's less than 100 years removed from the time of the New Testament, and Tertullian is saying quite distinctly, our doctrine does not vary at all from the doctrine given by the apostles. Well, what is he talking about? He's talking about worship and communion. He also said, all doctrine true which comes through the church from the apostles who were taught by God through Christ. All opinion which has no such divine origin in apostolic tradition to show is ipso facto false. From this, therefore, we draw up our rule. All right, they're drawing up their rule from what? From that which has no divine origin and apostolic tradition. So, in 175 A.D., the early Christians were saying what tradition was given. And they were looking at doctrine and they were looking at example. In Elucidations, he talks about on the Lord's Day, we count it lawful to fast on Sundays, then talk about the Lord's Supper. Ignatius, about 60 years earlier than Tertullian, no longer observing the Sabbath, but living in observance on the Lord's Day. This is from Justice Harvey, 165. And on the day called Sunday, all who live in cities or in the countries gather together in one place. But Sunday is the day in which we hold our common assembly. There's evidence, too, from church history they didn't meet every day. The Didache, having earlier confessed your sins so that your sacrifice may be pure, come together each Lord's Day of the Lord. Break bread, give thanks. Anyway, some concluding thoughts. What is it that people are saying against this idea of example? Hoagie, in The Quest for an Understandable Hermeneutic, says how ironic it is that the errors of the Campbells turned to making new barriers to fellowship over disputable interpretations of Scripture, and to rebuilding the very walls the Campbells sought to tear down. Now, again, that sounds, wow, I don't want to be guilty of that. You know, the Campbells did so much to try to restore New Testament Christianity and I don't want to turn right around and build walls that they thought to tear down. All right? So let's see what the Campbells actually said. Here's a quote from Thomas Campbell. "Let us do as we are there expressly told they did. Say as they said. That is, profess and practice as therein expressly enjoined," look at this, "by precept and precedent, in every possible instance, after their approved example." All right, so are we trying to tear down the walls that the Campbells built by talking about example and inference? Well, look at what they said. They said, we need to do and say as they did and said. Expressly enjoined by precept and by precedent. Precept, law, precedent, example. In every possible instance after their approved example. But if, after all, our brethren can point out a better way to regain and preserve that Christian unity and charity expressly enjoined upon the Church of God, we shall thank them for the discovery and cheerfully embrace it. Now, that was a little bit of the humor of Thomas Campbell. So, we read in the New Testament that this is what they taught and this is what they did. And here comes old Brother Jones and comes up with a better idea. I've got a better idea on how to do church than what we have in the New Testament. I got a better idea about taking the Lord's Supper. How about Thursday nights? How about doing it for weddings? And how about doing it for baptisms? And how about doing it during funerals? You know, he's saying, yeah, if you could come up with a better way to preserve Christian unity and charity, then we'll thank you for the discovery and cheerfully embrace it. But the fact of the matter is, there's not a better way than what you've got in the New Testament. That's from the inspired apostles of Christ. And so going back to the previous page, let us do as we are there expressly told they did, say as they said. And that is, profess and practice as therein expressly enjoined by precept and precedent. You're not going to find a better way. And I find it interesting that Campbell thought that our approaching the New Testament from this perspective, we're going to follow the commands, we're going to imitate the examples, is going to bring unity to the people of God. Because we're all on the same page, we all agree, this is what we need to follow and imitate, and so let's line up. But what has created the disunity that we see among us today? People that are wanting to do exactly the opposite of that. People that are wanting to say, no, we don't want to follow that example. We don't want to follow that precept. And, we think we can do things better. Well, that's what's created the disunity. It's not the problem of the hermeneutic. The hermeneutic, correctly applied, is going to unite us. And that's what Campbell wanted.
What do you think about this statement? I was told the Bible is only dealing with the salvation issue. So we cannot get everything from the Bible. For example, the example says if you want to learn how to cook, you cannot get it from the Bible. If you want to learn how to communicate, you cannot get it from the Bible. So the point is, the Bible cannot teach us everything but the salvation. So is that a fair statement? Or
I think it's a fair statement. I mean, God's primary concern is the salvation of men's souls. That's why Jesus came, to seek and save the lost. So, that's the primary focus. But I would also point out that with that statement, you're going to have trouble with, like, say, Proverbs. Because Proverbs have all sorts of things that just have to do with common horse sense, getting along, being a good businessman, being a good neighbor, being a friend, taking care of your body. There are all sorts of things that are found in a book like that. You say, okay, well, what are you going to do with the Proverbs that talk about areas of life that are not really the salvation issues as much as good living?
That's poetry. That's Old Testament. So
okay, yeah, I might have to go that way then. All right, what did Alexander say? We looked at what Thomas said. Alexander said, whatever the disciples practiced in their meetings with the approbation of the apostles, it is equivalent to an apostolic command to do the same. Apostolic example is justly esteemed of equal authority with an apostolic precept. Now, is that confusing to anybody? I mean, we're trying to tear down the walls that we're trying to rebuild the walls the Campbells tried to tear down by talking about example and inference. No, that whole thing is such a low blow and so inaccurate to what the Campbells were doing. The Campbells saw that we needed to imitate what they taught the apostles and what the apostles did. Apostolic example is justly esteemed of equal authority with apostolic precept. That's from Alexander Campbell. Now, here is a quote from Rule Lemons. An approved example is one that has in some way been approved by the Lord himself or by the Holy Spirit as he guided the apostles in the early church. Not all New Testament examples are approved. Ananias and Sapphira are not. The incest at Corinth was not. Simon's attempt to buy the power to transmit miraculous powers was not. All were examples, but not approved examples. Some approved examples, which are nevertheless not binding, are the eating of the Lord's Supper in the third loft and at night, the singing of Paul and Silas at midnight in jail, and the collection sent to Jerusalem by personal messenger. An example, even an approved example, must have special characteristics before it can be made a binding principle for all to observe until the end of time. It is our conviction that unless an example has a command in the background that is clearly visible, it is not binding. In fact, it would be more accurate than to say that it is not the example, but the command that's binding. The example becomes a workout example of the command in operation. All right, so it's not that every example we're saying, well, you need to do that. James Barrett said, the Bible records certain events, and the record of those events in certain instances is the means we have of knowing the will of God. These events include actions by the early church, which, from all evidence available, were the result of apostolic direction. Therefore, in order to please God to the best of our ability, we should use the record of these events to give the direction and guidance which we need. These events, then, are binding as we regard commands to be binding, because they point out to us what God's will is concerning a certain matter. All right. Other quotes, I guess, but we'll just leave it at that. So when we think about this area of example, we're not coming up with myriads of topics and illustrations of, how the church has been pharisaical in binding all of these things. That's not the case. As someone that wants to do away with the E in the hermeneutic, give me some illustrations of what we're binding that fall under the example category. Now, chances are it's going to be Lord's Supper, and maybe it will be musical instruments, but it hasn't been my experience that they will bring up instruments in worship in the E part of it. But that would be a good opportunity for you to draw from what we talked about and say, well, actually, that's not an example. it really doesn't fall in the category of example, and here's why. And then talk about the imperative followed by participles. It's really a command issue. It's not an example issue. All right, let's, yes.
In Matthew 12, when the Pharisees come up to Jesus and basically rebuke him for his disciples eating the grain, would you say that that's an example of him responding with two examples right off the bat, with David and the showbread, and how David actually broke the law, but you don't condemn him, but you do condemn them when they did? And then he goes to the priests that work on the Sabbath. And it seems like he's using those examples right there to prove a point.
Right. Yeah, that's good. All right, let's move into the eye of the hermeneutic. Necessary inference. Does God hold man responsible for teachings he implies in the Scriptures? All right, it's maintained that if the Scriptures do not specifically forbid something, then there's no violation in its usage. All right, that's what there have been some in the religious world who have maintained, that unless God specifically lays it out and says you can't do this, then you can do it. Will this argument stand up under investigation from the Scriptures? All right, let's look at some examples. First, example number 1. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood, and you shall make the ark with brooms and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. All right? A text from Genesis 6:14 and 15. Observe from looking at this text. God specified what wood was to be used. And God specified what size the ark was to be. This specification forbade the use of ash, oak, cypress, pine, mahogany, or any other type of timber. Now, those that I've discussed this with, if they have opportunity to interrupt me, will interrupt me right here and say, but how do you know that? How do you know that it forbade the use of ash, oak, cypress, pine, or any other kind of timber? And my comeback to that is, if God had no objection to the use of any or every kind of timber, then why did he specify gopher? If God didn't really care, then why did he specify gopher wood? by the very nature of language, when something specific is given, everything in that same genre is automatically excluded. If you give a particular kind of wood, then we understand how that automatically eliminates other kinds of woods. If God didn't care, then he would have said, go get some wood and build an ark. And Noah could have got whatever wood he wanted. But when a specific wood was identified, that automatically eliminated all others. Now, that's a necessary inference. God never said, thou shalt not use cypress. Thou shalt not use mahogany. Thou shalt not use pine. Thou shalt, and how many different types of wood are there? Are there hundreds, right?
Thousands.
Thousands. Another example, Leviticus 10. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. All right, observe. The law of Moses had specifically stated that fire for the offering was to be taken from the brazen altar in the outer court. Leviticus 6, 8 through 13. What Nadab and Abihu offered was strange fire. That word strange doesn't mean weird. It means that which is unauthorized by God. Therefore, the principle is seen that when one uses that which God does not authorize, because the fact of the matter is, he never said they couldn't get fire from another place. He never said that they couldn't put incense with it.
How many times in the Old Testament did it say, be careful to do what I say?
Be sure to do all things. Well, especially in Leviticus when it's talking about priests. All right, all we're trying to do is establish the fact that when God says to do something one way, that automatically eliminates and excludes any other way. He never told Nadab and Abihu that they couldn't get fire from another place. He never told them that they couldn't offer incense or add incense to the fire. Okay, so, but obviously it was sinful. They're dishonoring God by venturing outside of what he had authorized. So even though one's heart may be right and one fulfills faithfully a multitude of other commands, God still expects full compliance.
Is the heart really right if they don't comply?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe they're, what I'm getting at there is, as I was talking about yesterday, they did an awful lot right, as far as the right place, the right time, the right clothes, the right active worship, but as far as we know, the fire was the one thing they did wrong. We don't know of anything else they did wrong.
When we think about, a person's heart and what they're doing, is there an element of maturity and understanding that goes along with it? I think of my dad. I knew nothing about Churches of Christ, but he had studied and realized I need to be baptized for forgiveness of sins. And he went to, there were about 4 denominations in town. They all told him no, because baptism isn't for remission of sins. And so he stayed away from those groups. But had one of them said yes, and he's baptized. Now, there's a lot of stuff he's still clueless about and needs to figure out. Where is he in terms of saved or lost?
He's saved. And the fact that the Bible describes the Christian walk as a journey from infancy to maturity, I think would be where I would go to prove that, because you're not going to know everything, and God does command and expect growth, and as he learns more,
right,
and he's responsible for the more that he's learned. Right. As far as what he had done at that point, he did the right thing for the right reason.
Jenny, I'm sure you've heard the argument that perhaps Nadab and Abihu were drunk, because immediately following that section, sort of out of nowhere, he starts talking about the commands against drunkenness. So perhaps that's one of the things they were doing wrong. If they were, that might be a stretch even to think that, but.
Yeah, and you still have to go back to what was it the text said was what they did wrong.
Right. Yeah.
And it was the fire. The problem is still the fire, no matter drunk or not drunk, and still got a problem with that. Yeah. And we're reminded that Moses considered what they did as dishonoring to God. They didn't treat God as holy. So if God says, I want you to do this, and you choose to do that, that's disrespecting God. That's not honoring God. And to come back and say, but you never said that I couldn't do that, is not going to work. It's not going to fly with God.
How about their Galatians 5 and such like?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll give you a little example. Maybe a little less. My wife's sisters are visiting her. One of my old sister-in-laws celebrating her 75th anniversary, and so they're talking about things that happened as a child. And my father-in-law's driving, her mother's sitting in the front seat, and the 2 girls are in the back. My wife is doing this to her sister, and she says, Mom, make her quit. And she says, I didn't touch you. It just makes me think of the kind of argument sometimes that we make to God. You didn't tell me no. Well, I told you what to do, and it just, it really seems so silly sometimes, the things that we say to try to excuse what we do. And the same thing's true with these men who are given as examples in Scripture. Why did you even do something different? I mean, was it better? Was it something other people around were doing? I mean, none of that was true. It's like, well, what were you thinking? Yeah. I mean, we do that all the time. We see people do silly things, and we think, how in the world did they ever even think that that was the right thing to do? And when it comes to Scripture, it's so important, that we get it right, and yet we come up with really silly things about reasons we don't do what God has simply said to do. And I mean, even these arguments, it's like you have to lead them through all the little bitty steps, and it almost seems silly to do that because, well, God said do it, and it's just really simple, and yet we make it so complicated, and it's just not.
Well, there's a reason why they're called the children of Israel. Because they really needed to be walked, taken by the hand and walked through this step by step on exactly what it is they're supposed to be doing.
Kind of along that same line, I heard a lesson from Dan Owen that I thought was real good. It was entitled, "Are You Flirting or Fleeing?" And it was based on 1 Corinthians 8 following about idolatry. And chapter 10 says, flee from idolatry. And is that, whether you're going to the temple and you're eating the meats and you're doing all those things, is that flirting with it or is that fleeing from it? Paul's telling them to get away from it. So when you look at things like, proper ways of worship or drinking or dancing or a lot of these different things, are you flirting with immorality or are you fleeing from immorality? I thought it was a good lesson.
That's a good point. Well, plus coming back to something David was asking just a minute ago, we used the phrase something as a salvation issue. And so in your general discussion with somebody that says, I just don't think that adding a piano to the songs that we sing on Sunday is that big a deal, I certainly don't think it's going to be a salvation issue. I said, I wonder if Nadab and Abihu were here and we asked them, was it a salvation issue to sprinkle a little incense into the fire? What do you think they would say? I think it was a salvation issue. Don't you think? It was a little thing. And by all counts, I just don't get what the big deal was. But it was a big deal to God. And if it's a big deal to God, it should be a big deal to us.
I think that says a lot about character, because what does that say about your relationship? Now imagine if every time I wanted to do something, I said to my wife, I want to do this tonight, and she says, well, I really, we got stuff going on, I really don't want you to do it. And I say, well, are you going to divorce me for that? She says, well, no, I'm not going to divorce you. And I say, oh, good, I'm doing it then. That's what you're saying to God every time you say, well, is this a salvation issue or not? And if you say no, or even, whatever the answer is, that's a horrible question to ask in the first place. Why? If this is what God wants, why don't you just do it instead of saying, well, God, are you going to send me to hell for this? Oh, if not, then I'm just going to go do what I want. That's a horrible kind of relationship.
Well, and you could throw into that illustration, I love you. You know I love you, so, God knows I love you. But, because of that, if I'm going to go do that stuff, then it's going to be okay. God knows I love him, so if I want to go ahead and do something outside of what I have authorization, well, that's manipulating love.
I mean, even Moses, the faithful servant of God, did God ask him to strike once, and he did more than once, and he couldn't cross the Jordan River?
Yeah. Did Moses love God? Yeah, but God still expected compliance, even to little things.
Once or twice?
Right.
Does that matter?
Well, speak to it the second time.
So that reminds me of the baptism. I mean, if that immersed once or twice, they're not connected, right? But,
yeah. All right, we know the story about Uzzah touching the ark, so I don't put the text up there. But the only instruction regarding touching the ark is Numbers 4:15. And so that's the only passage that they would have had to go on. And it says, and when Aaron and his sons had finished covering the holy objects and all the furnishings of the sanctuary when the camp is set out. After that the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them, so that they may not touch the holy objects and die. These are the things in the tent of meeting which the sons of Kohath are to carry. So it's in a larger discussion. You got one little blurb in there, so that the sons may, so that they may not touch the holy objects and die. That was it. The passage has no imperatives. There's a simple declarative. Aaron and his sons cover the holy objects, prepare them for transport. Then the sons of Kohath carry them so that they may not touch the holy objects and die. That's all you got. Few, if any, would question Uzzah's heart, sincerity, or desire to do right. The guys want to keep the ark from falling into the dirt, into the mud, off the side of the, rolling down the side of the hill. Whatever was the location, this holy object he didn't want to see come smashing down to the ground. He violated no command. Again, there were no imperatives. Thou shalt not touch the ark. And I'm making that point because Numbers 4:15 provides 0 imperatives. But Uzzah, the priest, and David were to understand from the statement of Numbers 4:15 that only the sons of Aaron could touch the Ark of the Covenant. All right. Now, within this, let's do a little excursus. And that is talking about biblical silence. Maybe need to separate silence into another category.
Just point out one other thing regarding the Uzzah thing. That never would have been an issue had the ark been carried by the priest rather than sitting in the cart when they were supposed to do it.
God talked about how he wanted the ark transported. Yeah. 2 major views regarding biblical silence. Silence is permissive. That is, since God didn't tell us not to, then we're free to do as we please. Our silence is prohibitive. That is, since God gave us a specific instruction, we're to assume that we are not to exercise liberties outside that specific instruction. Said 2 major views. I don't know of any other views at all. I'm not sure there is one outside of these 2. So really the area of biblical silence is a subtopic to necessary inference, because we're having to infer something from a non-statement from God. What are we to make of that? Are we to make liberty, that we're at liberty? Or do we take from that we are not at liberty to go beyond what was already stated? So, was Noah free to use any wood he wanted since God didn't specifically forbid it? All right, that's an inference in related to biblical silence. Was Nadab and Abihu free to get fire from whatever source they wanted since God didn't specifically tell them not to?
This just reminds me of somebody's argument. He said, said about the solo. So in the worship time, the argument for solo is you have no problem with one person praying, but why do you have problem with one person singing? So how do you give an answer to that?
Well, what we have example of is in singing is everybody singing. What the two passages you've got, Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3, is a we activity. So the biblical model when it's discussing singing is discussing congregational singing.
But one person praying, does the Bible say that?
Yeah, like 1 Timothy 2:8.
So if the Bible's okay, so this is not about we cannot use the example of well, I think we're still following the Bible. Have you heard about that?
Well, about solos versus praise teams, and we're definitely having to deal with that, and I think from 1 Corinthians 14 that there is an example of a solo, but the idea of the congregation coming together and everybody not singing that's in violation of what God wanted for corporate worship. And you can use Ephesians 5, I think you can, and Colossians 3 to show that.
So do you think that, I guess, different songs can be sung in different ways? Where, one song might be more everyone singing, like the Ephesians 5 method, and another song might be with some people singing and not everyone. Or I read an article by Everett Ferguson, and it was talking about singing in the early church, and he said that basically there are three different kinds that you see of ways they sang songs. One was one guy singing, and then them responding to him, and then him singing, and then everyone. One was like male and female singing back and forth to each other, and one was just everybody singing congregationally.
And it's all called singing, and it's all considered congregational singing. Psalm 136 was responsive, a song where the priest would sing one line, and the people would all in song respond, the mercy of the Lord endureth forever, and then he would sing the next line. So there's strong evidence to show that the early church did all of those things that you're describing. All right, so when we look at these, well, actually, I wanted to take a break. So let's stop here, take 15 minutes.
Also, did everybody get a chance to download the quote files? Okay.
Is that a PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I got the right file.
You got the right file. And if you got some other stuff, it was probably good too. So.
If it's not good, you need to let me know. Or clean it up and then send it back to me. Now, in my discussions with people on the idea of inference, most of them are going to answer Noah was not free to use another wood. Or Nadab and Abihu was not free to get fire from another source. I said, all right, then you believe in inference. No, I don't. I think that needs to be thrown out of the hermeneutic. I said, no, you believe in inference because there is no passage that says you couldn't use another wood. There's no passage that says you can't get fire from another place. And so that is an inference, and that's why it's being called a necessary inference.
Do you ever find that sometimes it's just more a question of specificity? A lot of times I'll say, once I explain that I only think you have to, that's only when God says absolutely do this, they'll go, oh, well, I believe that, when you say, use the example of Noah, they'll go, well, of course Noah had to use gopher wood. And a lot of times that just ends it. They'll go, oh, well, if that's what you mean, I thought you meant, you couldn't walk unless you could find a passage saying you can walk, and you can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And once you just say, no, it's only when God's specific, a lot of times I found that kind of ends the...
And that's been part of our problem with the hermeneutic is we haven't done as good a job of explaining really what this means and how it works out. So that's what we need to do a better job on. Okay, so it seems clear that when God gives a specific directive, it automatically eliminates all other possibilities. Sing in Ephesians 5 is a specific word, and it does not include the idea of play. Those are specific words. So if we were going to include the topic of instrumental music in the area of silence, it would only be to make this particular point. And that is, the words used are specific words. Ado means sing with the mouth. There is no way you're going to bring your guitar in and it's going to work with ado. It's too specific of a word. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if the idea of singing and playing was really what was allowable, symphoneo would have been the word used. But that wasn't the word that was used. The words used are not generic words. Now, they are generic in some sense, getting back to the idea of chants, the responsive type songs that you were talking about. Those are all with the mouth idea of singing. So that's maybe an example of a word that has both some generic aspects to it, but is also specific in some other aspects.
Would this idea of ado apply in talking about things like contemporary Christian music? Because they're singing and they're playing instruments outside of worship, and I know we talked about this is an all the time kind of deal. It's Monday through Sunday.
If it's being offered to God, then it doesn't matter when it's happening. And I've heard some say we would never do this on Sunday. But our praise songs with our band and our instruments but you called them praise songs. And if you're going to offer something to God, it has to be what God's asked for, no matter when it's done.
But then they'll say they're not intending to worship. That's what they'll come back with.
Well, the way I look at that does move it into a different category. Just because something might have a spiritual side to it, like you'll have country songs that will talk about church and talk about God but you're not offering that to God. You're just talking about, well, are you going to consider it sinful to sing that country song? Well, no. we'll sing patriotic songs during the 4th of July that are praising God for sovereignty and for country and so on. But in your mind, you're singing a patriotic song at a baseball game. You're not, and in my mind, pros kineo, the word translated worship, pros means toward, kineo means to kiss toward. And so if you're not kissing it toward God, then it's not worship. That's the word that's used that means worship. And so just because it has the name of God or it has some spiritual principles in it, does not in and of itself move it into the category of worship, because it's not being offered to God. So I can see how somebody might say, we're not worshiping with this. This is just something that we're doing by way of entertainment. I'm not saying I'm comfortable with that, because I'm not, but I can at least acknowledge, okay, well, maybe you can pull it off in your own mind. But if there's a song that's praising God for being God, and I'm sliding into worship, I'm going to be doing that in a hurry.
I can see your point on that. I was wondering, do you think sometimes the words of the song might, like if we're singing, we bow down and worship you, Lord, like, do you think the words can sometimes either make it to where you need to worship when you're singing the song, or
they have to, because those words are being directed to God. You can't have words that are being directed to God and then turn around and say, but I'm not directing that to God. It's like, no, you're saying we bow down, we worship you, Lord. That's what you're saying.
Well, at the same time, while you're saying I'm not worshiping God, you're still teaching and admonishing with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So that's really what Ephesians and Colossians seems to be about, are talking to one another with those things.
Is it possible that you're listening, and you're listening because you're being entertained, and what they're doing purely for entertainment? You're not trying to teach and admonish. You're not. All it is we're really talking about Christian rock. We're talking about that kind of music that all parties involved are trying to remove from, if it's even possible, and that might be your question, Chuck, from a spiritual, it's got spiritual principles, but it's not meant to be a worship activity at any level. Is that possible? Okay, maybe it is. I'm having trouble personally seeing how that could be, but I'm at least trying to stay within what I can prove biblically, and
Well, wouldn't it be equally possible to sit in worship service and sing and not really be worshiping because your mind's somewhere else?
Yeah, and Jesus called that vain worship.
Yeah.
Because you're there, and you're there to worship, and the fact that you are so undisciplined that you're singing these songs that are intending to, and everybody else around you is offering to God, and you are thinking about the baseball game that afternoon. That's vain worship.
So couldn't you be singing along to a instrumental music, song, even that praises God without worshiping then? Is that maybe that's not logical, I don't know.
I guess the question really is this a proskuneo activity? Are you kissing it toward God? Is that what you're intending to do? And so I plead guilty. I think all of us, we went all the way through a song and we realized I didn't think about a solitary word, but I sang it. Well, I was intending to worship with that. I just didn't. Got distracted and let my mind wander. Well, that's vain worship. But if a person has said, I'm not here to worship, what I'm about to do is I'm not intending to offer that to God. I remember when I was a teenager, probably 15, 16, I was invited over to the house of Norman Gibson, Roy Lanier Sr., Roy Lanier Jr. was there, and there was a song in the songbook that nobody knew. And so Norman Gibson, who was a very accomplished pianist, sat down, we all gathered around the piano, and he started pounding out the various notes and parts of this song that was in the songbook. And I'm thinking, I'm not comfortable with this. And so I talked to Brother Lanier about it later, and he said, we were not worshiping. We were learning a song, but we were not intending at all to use that song as an offering to God. So, you know, again, you've got to put things in kind of a framework and a context. What are you trying to do with the activity? Fortunately, it wasn't a song that said, we bow down and worship you, Lord. We weren't seeing that. Is that another comment on that?
Yeah, well, the only reason I would almost defend the side of listening to instrumental music outside of worship is just because of all the other garbage that's on the radio. If you want to listen to music, you don't want to listen to some of that other stuff, and turning it to a station that actually is clean is almost your best option.
Yeah. So, yeah, sad to say, but that's the world that we're in today.
Just another observation. It seems like we're talking about here in places like Ephesians 5 and Colossians 13, is inherently a different type of activity when you're sitting in your car listening to your radio, because this is a one another activity. You're speaking to one another. You're worshiping God together, as opposed to listening to something on the radio. It just seems like a different type of activity.
Yeah.
I guess to play the devil's advocate to that is, you know, if I'm in a place, you know, and there's all idolatrous worship going on here, but then there's a Protestant denomination over here, you know, it's okay for me to go and participate in the Protestant denomination because in my mind, theoretically, it's a little bit better than the idolatry that's happening. I mean, that's how I look at it. But.
Well, yeah, and as far as, you know, if it's sinful, it's sinful. Well, that's more sinful than this is. But, you know, I'm really asking the question, is listening to Christian rock in your car, is that a sinful activity? Well, I'm saying that it can be if it's a proscanero activity. If you're kissing it toward God and you're singing that song and you're praising God with that song, God's saying, where did I ask for that? Where makes you think that that's what pleases me? But if it's something that you're just listening to and you're not offering it to God at any level, it's just you're listening to it because it's clean, you're listening to it because you know, it's at least something that is not going to fill your mind with all these sinful things. But it's not intended to be offered to God. Can you do that? Well, yeah. If you can do that without worshiping with it, then more power to you. And I'm not prepared to say it's wrong. I'm saying I can't do it because I tried. That's how I know I can't. But you know, I've got people that say, look, I'm able to listen to hours and hours of Christian rock and never once worship with it. Props to you. Other comments?
I was just going to say that, you know, we've been talking so much about, you know, properly defining the terms, because even in Christian rock, there's two different spectrums, and there's songs that are going to be, you know, very praisey, and then there are songs that are going to be like, you're talking about those country songs that might say, you know, God bless the USA. And you've got two opposite ends of the spectrum. So it's really hard maybe, because maybe some of us are thinking one side and the other of us are thinking the other side, and I think a lot of it, at least in my opinion, comes down to the individual song and the words in the song.
Well, I think that was your point, wasn't it, Travis?
Yeah.
If you're singing, we bow down and worship you, Lord, you're kind of,
you don't have any other options there.
Chuck.
I guess my question earlier wasn't so much about us worshiping God, but in those places he's saying speaking to one another, so it's more of I'm teaching you something through song. Now, can you listen to a contemporary Christian song and say, okay, I'm not worshiping God with this. I think you can do that. But if you're going to say, I'm not learning anything, or it's not teaching me something, or it's not admonishing me, because you said, basically, this is better than that. Well, why is it better than that? Well, because of the lyrics. Oh, so you're listening to it, and it's teaching you, it's admonishing you in something, which is what Paul seems to be saying, more so than worshiping God.
Yeah, but, okay, so if you're going to carry that to its natural end, then do you have any books in your library that were written by denominational people? You cannot expose yourself to anybody or anything whatsoever that's going to teach that is going to be outside of. Paul was very well versed on, Cretan poets and, reading intertestamental literature and all that. So, I'm not prepared to go there and say, look, you got to shut the door on any and everything as far as teaching and admonishing one another. It seems like Paul's got more of a narrow view of what he's meaning by that in the songs, hymns, and spiritual songs.
But is that a one another activity when you listen to the radio? I mean, it's a one-way activity. It's not the same thing as what we're doing from together.
Well, it's one another in the sense that there is somebody on the other side of that song, and they're trying to do that to you.
And also, because that is in Ephesians 5:19, the to one another, with the speaking and teaching and admonishing, but also it says singing, making melody to the Lord. And so it kind of has both aspects in there, which seems like the to the Lord seems to me like the worship phrase there, as opposed to just the to one another.
I agree that, it's not, I don't believe it's a reciprocal activity when you listen to the radio. But, to me, the problem is with, for those guys, it is kissing it toward the Lord who made that music. It is, however anybody wants to justify that, they call themselves praising. I've not talked to very many guys in that situation that didn't say that they were praising. They admit that freely. They're praising God. And I think there's a problem that lies within entertaining myself with false worship. Those guys are participating in false worship. And I'm like you, I can't in good conscience entertain myself with that.
I have a real problem personally turning off the proskuneo. I can be talking to you as I am now and praying to God at the same time. And that is a kiss toward Him. And while I'm in a conversation with you, and the lines get really blurred for me. And do I really want to turn that off?
That's a good question.
Do I want to stop worshiping God at any time? Kissing to Him with my life, what I do. And so I'm really struggling with this whole concept of being able to suddenly switch it off and on, or even should I really do that?
Well, I'm not prepared to say that you should do that. But what you need to do is be willing to admit that somebody else can.
Yeah, I can give them grace, if you will, allow me to use the term that way, to them. I don't have any problem doing that. But the shutting off back and forth, I'm struggling with that whole concept right now in my mind about how do you do that, or should you?
Yeah. And then this is part of the warning that when I read the email from the university professor yesterday, part of the problem is taking the hermeneutic to the extent that we are really trying to legislate virtually every minutia of a Christian life. And so, now this hermeneutic has produced legislation on whether you can have a tattoo or whether you can carve, do this in remembrance of me on the communion table, or, and that's what, in the minds of so many, have reduced the hermeneutic to nothing but sheer foolishness, micromanaging, pharisaicalism, legalism, and all the other terms that might be used. Saying, all right, let's scale it back. Let's define our terms. Let's make sure that we understand that we're trying to define a hermeneutic as to when God has spoken, how He has spoken, what He's given us in command, and then even that has to be analyzed, because we talked about, generic commands, cultural commands, limited commands, so on. Talked about example. What are we going to do? We're going to imitate Peter in Galatians 2 and start withdrawing from a certain group of people. Well, that's a bad example. We're not going to imitate that example. Or, we're halfway through talking about necessary inference. How is this going to be applied? When we get to kind of the nuts and bolts of here we are, 21st century Christians, what does this mean to us? What are we talking about when we talk about the using of necessary inference in order to determine doctrine and practice? Defining our terms, making sure that we're not coming across like we're trying to answer every conceivable question. I need to make a PowerPoint slide in order to maybe where you can see this better than my describing it. But you know what a grid is. You've got this grid, the square, and it's broken into all of these little subsections on this grid. And it seems to me that this grid is really going to be broken into 4 parts. And in this, let's say, top left grid so it's 25% of the entire grid, 25%, but it's also broken into, millions of little bitty parts. And we label that particular part of the grid commands. So somebody comes to you with a Bible question, and that Bible question actually is answered in the command area of Scripture. So that goes into one of those little slots. Are you following my illustration? Over here, with the next part of the grid, are examples. And it's got all these divisions in it. And somebody asks a question, and that question actually is answered through biblical example. And so that goes over there. That goes into this grid. And then down here, you've got necessary inference. And somebody asked a question that really has to do with necessary inference. Well, that goes into that grid. And then the 4th section of the grid are non-biblically discussed topics. There's no place to go. It's a Bible question, or it's a spiritual question of which the Bible provides absolutely no direction whatsoever. The Bible is not going to answer that question. Okay? That needs to go into that. As far as I know, and you guys feel free to correct me if I'm missing something, but where would you go to talk about whether it's wrong to do this in remembrance of me in the communion table? Okay. I'm putting it in grid 4. I don't know about you, but to me, I'm just saying, do it or don't do it. I went to one of these foreign countries that were seriously chastising a brother, sinful activity, because he failed to put the sheet over the bread and the fruit of the vine. And granted, they've got a fly problem big time, and but was that sinful? I mean, but in their mind, they're wanting me to jump into the fray here. And it's like, look, in my mind, I'm thinking that's in this fourth quadrant of the hermeneutical grid. Thou shalt cover the communion. I don't know where to go with that. And so, I don't know if that helps you, but it has really helped me in the myriads of Bible questions that we have to deal with. Praise teams, 1 cup, Thursday night communion. And in my mind, I'm going, okay, where does that fit? Where can I go in order to provide a Bible answer on praise teams? Okay, well, I'm seeing that it really needs to fit into the command grid. Okay, why is that? You start walking your way through it, or maybe you're walking someone else through the whole discussion of praise teams. But the Thomas Albrights of the world would say that's way too rational and forensic, and it's way too dependent upon human reasoning. But my response to that has been, and you've heard me say this now for 4 days, is that this is where God has brought us. This is what God wants us to do. Say, I don't get that. Why do you say this is what God wants us to do? Because God communicated sometime only through example. Because God communicated sometimes only through inference. And that's the way God works. And so it's not me that's created the grid. It's God that's created the grid. And God has made some topics that are clearly defined in the command arena. God has put some things that are in example. God has put some things that are in inference. And so all I'm doing is operating within this biblical hermeneutical grid in trying to discern the will of God and how God expects us to come up with answers to the myriad of spiritual questions. Okay, let's look at some other examples. Matthew 22, I believe, is one of the best and most powerful proofs for necessary inference. Jesus answered and said to them, "You are mistaken." Well, I'm getting to the nitty-gritty. Everybody's familiar with the account, right?
Yeah.
The Sadducees come. They have an argument that the Pharisees never could answer, based upon the Levirate law, that if a man dies without having fathered any children, the next oldest brother has the responsibility of having sex with this woman, taking her as his wife, and getting her pregnant. And then if she happens to have a son, then that son actually is his dead brother's son, not his, according to the Levirate law. Everybody knows the story, right? Okay, so they come up with this illustration of a woman that worked her way through all 7 brothers. All 7 brothers had her. Not a single one ever succeeded in getting her pregnant. And then she ultimately dies. All right, in the resurrection, who does she belong to? 7 men had her. Well, that was an argument that the Pharisees just could not answer. All right, so Jesus answered and said to them, "You are mistaken, not understanding the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." All right, stop right there. Jesus said, your first mistake was you made an assumption that you never got from Scripture. And that is that there's marriage in heaven. So that right there was where you messed up. And the Pharisees made the same mess up. They assumed that there was marriage in heaven as well. Okay, where did you get that? Where did God ever say that? All right. Then Jesus goes on to say, but regarding the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was spoken to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. All right, so let's break this down into a syllogism, an argument through reason. Major premise, God said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's Exodus 3:6. Minor premise, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob must still be alive, although they died physically 400 plus years before this was written. The statement was made by God in Exodus 3:6. That's 1400 BC. Abraham lived 2000 BC. Isaac and Jacob, 100 or so years after that. All right, so in this passage, God is implying the doctrine of the resurrection. He is not stating the doctrine overtly. It's only through implication. And the Pharisees, and in this case, the Sadducees, had failed to infer what God was implying. So, observe. Jesus accused the Sadducees for being mistaken, for not knowing this implied truth. Now, I don't know if you've ever studied that word mistaken, but here it is. The word is planiste, and the word means led astray or led into error. That's the word Paul uses in talking about homosexuality in Romans 1, and Paul's teachers in 2 Thessalonians 2. No, we're recording this for all eternity. We got David's chapel alerts, and you're... Now, my point is, this is not just, oh, well, you guys kind of missed the boat on that, but life goes on. It's not that. Jesus is saying, you have believed and practiced a damnable error doctrine. You are planiste. You're engaged in a sin that is of the same category or magnitude as homosexuality and false teaching. So, it's not a minor misunderstanding. It's a grievous error that will condemn those who commit it.
Do you think that Daniel 12 is a passage, the first two verses there, that teaches life after death, or do you think that has a...
No, I think it does, but the Sadducees only accepted the Pentateuch.
Okay.
And so, if you were going to convince them of anything, it was going to have to be from the first 5 books.
There are a lot of Jews that still do that. I mean, they just really accept it. I remember talking with a chaplain at the hospital who is Jewish, and I talked to her a little bit about Isaiah, and she said, "Oh, that's a Christian book."
I had never heard that.
But she really believed that. I mean, for her, and she, her goal was to become a rabbi. Not thinking of the right word, but anyway, and that was she spent her whole life up until she was 25 years old to do that, and then kind of changed her direction because there really wasn't a lot of opportunity for her to become one. But she really spent a lot of time. But she said, no, we don't really use it. It's the rest of the Bible is really looked upon as, by us anyway, our group as that's Christians.
Huh. Well, I know that modern Judaism is the result of Pharisees, and modern Judaism basically embraces the same doctrine that the Pharisees did in the first century, and they exalted the Torah over the other books, but they still believed that the older books were law books from God. And so to hear somebody basically espouse a view that the Sadducees held.
Yeah, I was really surprised.
Yeah. I didn't even know there were such today. So Jesus held the Sadducees responsible for not correctly understanding this truth, although it was nowhere clearly stated in the Old Testament. More specifically, nowhere clearly stated in the Torah. Therefore, God does give man truth that is not in the form of an imperative, and he expects man, through study, to arrive at truth.
Just in regards to this, especially the example that we have, I look at the church today, and there are so many views, even in the church today, about the resurrection or about the book of Revelation. So many different widening views about that one particular book. How do we apply that to the Christian today?
Well, I think, first of all, there's an exegetical problem, and that is that the books like Revelation haven't really been studied the way they're designed to be studied, and as a result, there's going to be application made, especially with a dispensationalist or a premillennialist that are not consistent with that type of literature. Within our own movement, we've got the AD 70 theory and stuff like that, which again it's a hermeneutic problem because of a failure to do exegetical work. And we've got to get back to some fundamentals when it comes to Bible study, and that we're reaping the fruits of basically 2 decades of real shoddy Bible study. And it's our job to bring people back.
To prevent someone from taking this principle and taking a passage such as baptism for the dead and saying, well, look, see what this implies. Therefore, it's the practice that we need to be doing because it implies this.
Well, again, but it doesn't imply that's what we should be doing. You do your exegesis, you see all that is an illustration of some aberrant group out there that they at least see the importance of or believe in a resurrection.
So it's an oversimplification when somebody claims that the hermeneutic is limited to just this, because we're talking about exegesis to understanding the passage correctly as well.
Yeah, and see, here's the exegesis in the Matthew 22 illustration. What's the difference between I am and I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? I mean, this whole argument is based on the turn of a verb, whether it's present tense or past tense. And Jesus is charging them with a grievous, damnable error in their by doctrine and practice, all based upon the turn of a verb tense. Now, I got to admit that to me, that's a big wow thought. That, you want to talk hermeneutics, and this is why I said, I see Matthew 22 as really one of the primary illustrations of necessary inference. And I've got guys that will tell me, and recently I was sitting with a guy and he does this. Come on, Denny. Do you actually think that in Ephesians 5, Paul is trying to combat using instruments in worship? Do you really think that's what Ephesians 5 is all about? And I thought, that's an argument that is in the mind of a lot of people. And it basically, the way they look at it, washes the argument away. That, there's no way Paul is trying to give us a little mini dissertation on make sure you sing a cappella only and don't use instruments. No, that's not what he's talking about. That's not what he's trying to prove. So my question is, in Exodus chapter 3, was God trying to teach us the doctrine of the resurrection in Exodus 3? No. That wasn't the point at all. All he's doing, Moses saying, who are you? Well, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who I am, and you need to go tell them that this is the God that's sending you. Oh, okay, that's context. He's not giving a little meaning, but Jesus bases an entire argument in Matthew 22 upon an inference that was a part of a different conversation. What we're doing in Ephesians chapter 5 is exactly the same thing. Paul's talking about Christian worship, and it just so happens, in the context of talking about Christian worship, he uses two words that are specific words related to Christian music that do not, cannot, will not allow the inclusion of musical instruments. So we're looking at that and we're going, wow, how about that? And it's the same kind of wow going that the Sadducees got when Jesus talked about Exodus 3. And I never thought about the is versus the was aspect of Exodus 3.
Do you think the Sadducees' attitude with the, when we talk about different views of the book of Revelation, or there are different views that exist, but I think most of those people, and even in this room this week, we've demonstrated a sincere desire to know what the truth is and practice it. But the Sadducees weren't interested in that at all. The Pharisees have been trying to tell them for how many years that there's a resurrection, and they're just like, whatever, you guys are idiots.
Yeah.
And do you think that comes into consideration?
That is probably the number one consideration. Because we're unfortunately dealing with people whose minds are so made up and they're so locked in. Just like, I told you yesterday or Tuesday, whenever it was, about, we were having this discussion with the area churches on instruments in worship. And so when the other side was going to be presented, not a single person showed up. Why would you do that? Well, not truth seekers, not interested. You already got your mind made up. You already know. And even when I called them and said, why weren't you there? Because we already know what you were going to say, and our minds are made up. Wow. Okay. So there's no sense my continuing to beat my head against the wall to try to get anywhere with you, because you're no longer open. Is that outside?
Sounds like there's a phone off the hook, but it's the loudest phone ever.
It's a car.
I think it's a car horn.
Okay, so if a man fails to see and follow that truth, then he is held guilty, even though he has violated no command. He's only failed to infer a truth that God implied. That's your car that's got the car alarm going?
No.
Your car's calling you.
Somebody's going to come and tell me it's my car.
Maybe that's right.
Yes.
We hear it, but we don't know.
It's a blue Chrysler looking Durango that is panicked. So if it belongs to you, because it wouldn't be a undergrad student, I don't think.
Graduate student wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Like, you think you know who it?
I believe it's, can't remember his name, but Stephen McCall. I know they had one.
It's not a dark blue, it's a lighter blue than that.
Okay, you better make the announcement to the other class, and then maybe try to find Stephen if he might be in the library or someplace.
Yeah.
Then just go disconnect the battery.
Usually they shut off after 30 seconds,
You want to raise it up just for here?
Oh, sure enough. Oh, there it goes. Oops. Oh. Okay, so when we think about this last point, that you violated no command, the only thing you did wrong, the only thing the Sadducees did wrong in this regard was fail to infer something that was only implied. Now, our premise has been, ever since the first day of class, that if it can be proved that God holds men responsible for something that was only implied, and God expected us to infer, then that has to be a part of your hermeneutic. Does this not all by itself accomplish that goal? You are engaged in a grievous error. Why are they embroiled in sinful behavior? Because they failed to get the difference between I am and I was, and how that related to the doctrine of the resurrection. That is amazing. But again, what we're trying to do is figure out how God communicates. How God communicates. Now, there are other examples, but remember in Galatians 3, when Paul's talking about, he did not say into seeds, but to seed, singular, that is Christ. All right, he's building an entire doctrine, argument, based upon whether a word was plural or singular. Now, you were supposed to infer that the seed, by it being singular, only had one individual in mind. Wow. Seriously? Yeah? You were. All right, fifth example, Hebrews 1:5. For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you? And again, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. All right, let's just see if you're kind of seeing what I'm seeing. What would this particular passage contribute to the area of necessary inference? Which part would you point to and then see as a case in point? Why is this example number 5? Anybody see it?
When did he ever say this to the angels? He never did. And so I was making a point based on the fact that on silence. The fact that it never did say that.
Not to an angel.
Do you see that? Here's a point. They should have gotten something by what was not said to them. Wow. So, observe. The Hebrew writer, through inspiration, is demonstrating the superiority of the Son to the angel by the fact that God did not say at any time to an angel, you are my son. Thus, man was to understand that angels were not God's son. Or maybe a better way of saying that, they were not in the same category as God's son. Were not equal with God's son. Well, how would you conclude that? Because God clearly said they were not? No. But because he never so declared them. He said this about Jesus, but he never said that about anybody else. Okay? So I am supposed to deduce from that they're not equal with that. Angels are not equal with him.
There's one thing that caught my eye. It says, was and am.
Where's that?
In Hebrews. In Hebrews 5. It says it. Touch it back up there. You are, and it was are, and will be.
I'm sorry, I missed the point.
He says, you are my son,
Oh, okay.
and I will be a father.
Yeah. I got you.
Okay, so one might argue that what God has not specifically forbidden, he approves. Thus, one could falsely believe that an angel could be his son, since God never said that an angel was not or could not be his son. As a matter of fact, the terminology I'm using was chosen carefully because that's what those that want to dispose of the old hermeneutics say. That what God has, quote, not specifically forbidden, he approves. That's the jargon that is used. But how is that going to fit with Hebrews 1:5? Well, it's not. The silence of the Scriptures provides a warning to man not to assume something is acceptable to God without divine revelation.
Denny, where would actually fit? Because in his sermons on trying to justify the use of instruments at Highland, he talks about, he uses many of the principles we've talked about. So is he trying to say we can conserve this hermeneutic and use the instrument? Or is he still saying, no, we got to throw away that?
He's saying we got to throw away the hermeneutic. But he's a perfect example of somebody that's not consistent. Because when you listen to other sermons and talking about other biblical doctrines, he's using inference all the time. All right, example number 6 from Hebrews 7. For when the priesthood is changed, of necessity there takes place a change of law also. For the one concerning whom these things are spoken belong to another tribe, from which no one has officiated at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, a tribe with reference to which Moses spoke nothing concerning priests. All right, so observe. No person of the tribe of Judah served at the altar because Moses did not declare Judah to be the priestly tribe. Thus, by divine authority, Moses gave permission to the Levites to be the priestly tribe. this permission was given to the exclusion of all other tribes, although Moses did not specifically exclude them.
What I love about this passage is the writer's teaching hermeneutics.
He is teaching hermeneutics. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And it's basically on this argument right here that, would you say that's why Saul and King Uzziah were both punished when they tried to take over priestly duties, because neither of them were from Levite, even though...
Yeah. They were never told they couldn't be priests.
Yeah.
And so, only what God authorizes can be divine truth. And you're violating God's will if He included any tribe with Levi to be priests. You can't add to what God specifies. So, God's silence then is prohibited. He only authorizes what He specifies. What those that are wanting to do away with the Cine hermeneutic are demanding is that God say, I want Levi to be the priestly tribe. Not Reuben, not Judah, not Simeon, not Asher, not Naphtali. Walk us through all 11 other tribes and specifically say, not them, 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 or them. And if God doesn't do that, then going ahead and including them would have been fine. But that's not the way God works. And that's not the way we work. When we give a specific directive, we understand it automatically eliminates everything else. And as Chuck was, Travis was giving us an illustration, 2 Chronicles 26. King Uzziah burned incense in the temple. He's operating as a priest. God had said only the sons of Aaron were to do this. But God never told King Uzziah he couldn't do it. Okay, so as we wrap up our discussion of inference, kind of some bullet points. A law does not have to detail everything it does not allow. sheer foolishness of this argument that's being made is, all right, it says speed limit 30. Not 31, not 32, not 33, not 34. Come on.
Yeah.
You know, we understand the way this works in our world. God's way of dealing with man is to tell him and show him through divine example what he wants. A specific command automatically prohibits all else. Can you think of an illustration, maybe even one I've given in this class that would fit with that last bullet point? What is an example of a specific command that can't, everything not including that command is excluded and cannot be authorized except by some other commandment or example?
Moses speaking to the rock.
Okay, speaking of the rock would fit.
I think outside of that, when you mentioned the speed limit sign thing, I thought of this. If you see a speed limit sign that says speed limit 75, and then you, maybe a mile further down the interstate, you see one that says minimum speed 65, you don't determine from that second sign that now you can drive any speed over that minimum. I mean, you have to infer that you've got to go between those speed limits.
You still have a cap.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we talked about greet one another with a holy kiss. And if that's all that you had, then that's all that you could do.
Right.
And so he gives a specific command. Everything not included in that command is excluded. So any other kind of greeting would automatically have been excluded, except by some other commandment or example. So now we have another example of greeting. All right, well that expanded then the scope of greet one another with a holy kiss. Without that, you're gonna need to stay within the confines of that command. Okay, let's break for chapel.